Welcome, traveler. The following is Mckayla Stokes' background story. It is an edited-down version of her character creation video. There is nothing new here, but it's made for anyone that wants to know her background without having to sit through a character creation video. Anyways, enjoy. Jasmine Vera grew up with Raccoon City's rougher crowd. Unable to learn from her mistakes, or from those of her parents, she made countless wrong decisions. One of them was having a stranger's baby at the age of 16. With no way of finding the guy, Jasmine had to raise their daughter, Mckayla, alone. This was the kick she needed to finally mature. Supported by strained parents, Jasmine was able to graduate high school. She'd spend the next 2 years working odd jobs, but eventually found her way into college, and at age 22, Jasmine Vera graduated with a nursing degree. By then, Mckayla was 6 years old. The child found herself being raised mainly by her grandparents. Jasmine, however, spent the next several years working for different offices and practices before eventually landing a job at Raccoon General Hospital. The mother's endless hours and aging grandparents left Mckayla on her own. Now 14, the growing girl fell in with the same crowd that Jasmine had worked so hard to escape. These people welcomed Mckayla. They accepted her, gave her the attention that she desperately needed, and while she wasn't involved with gang activity, illicit actions were normalized for her. School became a barrier. It was just something that Mckayla had to sit through before she could go and hang out with her friends. Things changed when Jasmine married Dr. Gilbert Lewis. She moved in with him and shipped her daughter off to a private school. Now 16 years old, Mckayla found herself surrounded by newer, better people. And though they weren't openly hostile towards her, the only person that she really clicked with was a girl named Sophia Stokes. Sophia was a grade A student. Part of multiple clubs, the girl had big goals and bigger dreams. They were all set to come true. But constant heartbreak and endless comfort saw her friendship with Mckayla grow into something stronger. Now a couple, the two were never apart. And sadly, Mckayla's carefree attitude eventually leaked into Sophia. The honor student's grades started falling. As this unfolded, both Jasmine and Gilbert pushed Mckayla to become a better person. They argued, threatened, and pleaded for her to grow up. She wouldn't. Mckayla was happy with how things were. She'd continue spiraling despite their best efforts. After months of constantly fighting, Mckayla blew up. She accused her mother of being a failure, saying that the only reason Jasmine's life improved was because she married a doctor. They argued for hours, until Gilbert broke them apart and pulled Mckayla aside. He spoke without anger, each word perfectly restrained, as he told her that she was being cut off. Mckayla would get nothing more than basic food and shelter until she straightened up. But even this wouldn't work. Because despite being carefree, Mckayla was resourceful. She knew that several students at her school smoked weed, and after paying a visit to her friends in Raccoon's underbelly, the girl started dilling. Mckayla earned more money than any student would know what to do with, and yet she found a way to spend it. Sophia tagged along throughout this time. She wouldn't deal anything herself, but definitely shared in the spoils. The money was their gateway to a brighter future. In it, Sophia was a dentist. She'd drive a fast car while Mckayla had her own SUV. They'd live in a big old house and even have 2 dogs. But these were Sophia's plans, because when pressed for dreams of her own, Mckayla couldn't give a solid answer. She knew that the future was coming, but that was tomorrow's issue. For now, she just wanted to enjoy the present, and the present led to Mckayla dropping out of high school. In her mind, she was going to fail anyways, so why stay? Despite slipping grades, Sophia earned her diploma, and though she gladly accepted it, the once proud student felt that she could have left with a better GPA. Now free, and still dreaming, they moved into a single-bedroom apartment. Finally on her own, Mckayla stopped talking to her parents. They tried winning her back multiple times, and though they succeeded to some degree, things were never the same between Mckayla and Jasmine. Almost strangers now, their relationship devolved into somewhat monthly visits and holiday well-wishes. Gilbert's final shot at buying Mckayla's love came on her 24th birthday, when he bought her a car. It earned nothing more than a half-hearted thanks. 7 years after high school, and little had changed. Sophia kept free of drugs, but practically fused with the bottle. She still lived with Mckayla, who had fallen onto harder drugs. They'd travel between parties, but always ended up back at the same apartment. During one wild night, the two drunkenly talked about getting married. They didn't do it, but Mckayla ended up with a tattoo across her right thigh. It was her new married name, Mckayla Stokes. Life stagnated for another year. Now 25, Mckayla went out for a routine deal at Raccoon Park. The guy she was supposed to meet was a trusted friend. He never showed. Instead, two strangers held her at knife point. Their robbery ended with Mckayla pulling a gun and one man dead. Though bruised and shaken, Mckayla made it home safely. She burst into tears as soon as the door closed behind her. Sophia jumped right into action, beer in one hand, tissue in the other, and for a brief moment, high school comfort returned. The couple stayed up throughout most of the night, but when Mckayla stopped crying and fell asleep, Sophia saw the sunrise. She did this from their grimy fifth-floor apartment, surrounded by dirty laundry and flanked by empty bottles. There weren't any dogs. They didn't own a house, and Sophia hadn't become a dentist. For the first time since she graduated, the once proud student felt like a failure. And for the first time in her life, she blamed Mckayla. The next morning, Sophia sat her girlfriend down and unloaded, saying that Mckayla could have died last night. She would have passed without accomplishing anything. In fact, the only thing Mckayla would have left behind was Sophia, and the failed student wouldn't have been able to make it on her own. Their youth was fading. It was time for both of them to grow up. Harsh words broke through. Mckayla felt the Grim Reaper leaning over her shoulder. Yes, she was still shaken, but the girl agreed. The same day, Mckayla signed up with a temporary agency, getting her first job at the age of 25, and she hated it. Factory work killed her soul. Every bit of the 10-hour workday felt like absolute torture. But despite being lazy, Mckayla is resilient. She made it through her first week by telling herself that she had to do this for Sophia. That notion died when she got her first paycheck. It wasn't anything close to what she was used to making. Mckayla quit her job soon after. When Sophia found out, she was furious. The two argued until Mckayla called up the temp agency and found another job. She'd wind up getting fired 2 weeks later. This started a cycle that continued for months, until Sophia's patience ran out. After yet another broken promise, Mckayla returned to an empty home. In Sophia's place was a note explaining that she moved back in with her parents. Already working at a diner, the student took things one step further by actually enrolling in college. The letter closed with her saying that they couldn't be children anymore, and that if Mckayla wasn't going to grow up, then Sophia wasn't staying with her. Mckayla responded by going wild. She spent the next 2 weeks on a bender. Each night got worse until she took a blade to her tattoo. Blood gushed down her thigh, and she wound up getting stitches at Raccoon General Hospital. With no choice but to face the silence of an empty apartment, Mckayla went home. It was still a disaster. She wasn't sure how the laundry had piled up, or where the trash had even come from. But the mess was sobering. Things got worse when Mckayla slipped on a bottle and landed in front of her mirror. Lonely and in pain, the woman felt her age creeping in. The person staring back at her wasn't a teenager. She just acted like one. Rolling onto her back, Mckayla faced every truth the night held for her. When morning finally came and damnation released her, Mckayla called the temporary agency. They warned her that this next job would be her last. 2 days later, she found herself running a tram tour at some local umbrella facility. It wasn't ideal, but Sophia was worth handling tourists. Mckayla managed the job for 2 weeks before calling her girlfriend. Their chat was short. Sophia said that she was proud of her, but 2 weeks wasn't enough time for someone to change. Things couldn't be fixed that easily. Sophia ended the call by admitting she wasn't ready to end their relationship, but she still wanted space. And the student was right. Mckayla hadn't changed. Because a few weeks later she started showing up late for work, if she showed up at all. Mckayla was watching the news on the eve of Raccoon's destruction. Reports claimed that the entire city was breaking out in riots. An aerial overview showed that the unrest was only a few blocks away from where Sophia worked. Grabbing her jacket, Mckayla threw on the first pair of pants she found, took a kitchen knife, and raced out the door. She didn't give a second thought to driving deeper into Raccoon City. Kinda colorful, right? I think it's a good starting point, though. You'll notice that I really didn't include information about Mckayla's friends or a lack of them. That detail just felt less and less important as I worked on her story, and though it is her story, I tried to focus more on the people around her. I feel like Mckayla has spent most of her life reacting. She's not the one to take control, and when someone finally gave her control, she chose to stay in the exact same position. Every important detail of her life was brought about by another person, and honestly I think she's okay with that. Maybe the Raccoon City incident is what she needs to grow up, if she survives, that is. I guess we'll find out soon, won't we? And there you go. I hope to see you in the solo roleplay video. Until then, I'll be in other worlds.